on today's episode of The Mythic Masculine.
So matrimony and wedding are not the same thing. I've come to understand matrimony to be a deity, a kind of radical presence, a kind of sadly neglected, deeply misconstrued, and disregarded ancestral presence for the Anglo-North America that I know so well. And the root word for matrimony is not woman, it's not wife, it's not feminine, it's mother, very specifically mother. So it's the repertoire of mothering. Mothering what, though? Matrimony very clearly is a repertoire for culture mothering.
What does it mean to be a man? And what kind of masculinity is needed to meet these uncertain times? In an era defined by polarized conflict and existential threat, how can we draw upon the rich lineage of mythopoetics to navigate this terrain? I'm your host, Ian McKenzie, and together with an array of guests, we'll explore various pathways to realign masculinity with thriving life. Greetings, dear listener. I'm your host, Ian McKenzie. My guest today is once again Stephen Jenkinson, a culture activist, teacher, and author, and principal instructor of the Orphan Wisdom School, co-founded with his wife, Nathalie Roy. He has master's degrees from Harvard University in Theology and the University of Toronto in social work. The school, though now formally closed, has made an incredibly significant mark on my life, and Stephen continues to tour and teach all over the world. I've had the wild good fortune to have collaborated with Stephen in numerous ways over the years, including producing the short film Lost Nation Road, as well as being part of the team architecting the Scriptorium, an Orphan Wisdom online archive. His most recent book, Matrimony, Ritual, Culture, and the Heart's Work, is the subject of our conversation today. In a time when many couples are opting out of marriage altogether, sensing that the modern wedding has become little more than a hollow performance, Stephen offers a different perspective. He suggests that wedding and matrimony are not interchangeable at all. One is largely engineered so that nothing really happens. The other, when approached as a deity, can become an alchemical ritual, where vows are enactments and blessings might bind all who attend with real consequence. Through personal stories from the trenches, Stephen reminds us that matrimony, at its core, is a radical act of citizenship, a cultural undertaking where love is asked to nourish more than the couple themselves, and where village emerges from the willingness to place life at the center. Before we begin, you're invited to check out my website, The Mythic Masculine, to explore upcoming and in-person and online offerings, as well as how to become a paid Substack supporter. This podcast is a true labor of love, and I've never accepted advertising. Instead, I rely on listeners like you to fund the show. If you've found insight and solace from my conversations, please consider upgrading your membership. Visit themythicmasculine.com for more details. And now, enjoy my conversation with Stephen Jenkinson. Welcome, Stephen. Glad to be in conversation with you one more time.
Ian, man, we go back a long way. I can't say that with many people, but I can safely and fondly say it about you.
Thanks, Steve. Feeling is mutual. And we're circling now around the release of your new book, scarce a month out from being released for this recording. And it's a book on matrimony. And this book, I was, there was hints of this. Yeah, I think even a couple of years ago, you were working on it, and I was excited then. And I'm glad that it finally made its way into the world. And there's a lot I think that we could get into around this subject, which for many people may be thinking like, isn't Steve Jenkinson, isn't he the death guy? So like, why is he talking about weddings or matrimony, right? And that might be a good place to start. Is where's the line between the death guy, the realm of death, let's say, and then matrimony?
Well, you could say the specter of finality would be one of them, one of the commonalities between the two endeavors.
Yeah.
Honestly, though, I would say that the real through line for me amounts to this. When I was working in the death trade, I mean, nobody told me what I'm about to say to you. I did have to find out about it, and I believe I did. That I understood finally that dying and death in particular, to be a deity, to be a kind of remarkable, adamant, not benign, but not predatory either, presence in the room, in the house, in the bone house, really across the board. And what it seemed to be asking of us was that we learn its ways, which is partly learning its language, learning its etiquette, learning its inflection, learning its dialect. Those are all fundamental enterprises for people who intend to be hospitable to life rather than simply to be a beneficiary, right? So what's the crossover then to matrimony? And I would say that I've come to understand matrimony to be similarly a deity, a kind of radical presence in the house, and a kind of sadly neglected, deeply misconstrued, and disregarded ancestral presence for the Anglo North America that I know so well.
I think folks listening in, again, who have come to an understanding, sort of unquestioned of what weddings are, and maybe using the term matrimony and again, an archaic version. Isn't that an archaic word for wedding? And not maybe it's going to take a bit of time to kind of lay the groundwork to understand actually what this is asking, of which you do in the book at length. And I think to offer an overture, perhaps the way that I've come to understand, largely from attending some of the weddings that you've orchestrated, great encounters that kind of reconfigured entirely my understanding of what a wedding is and could be. That I'll offer one or two strands. One is that if somebody's listening into this, they're probably a certain kind of person who kind of wonders how the world got the way it is, and is maybe concerned about the way the world is, and maybe wants to figure out how to proceed differently. And a lot of folks who listen in too may have a sense that village is the way, or village is what we lost. So where's all the villages? Why don't we have more? And there's something around my understanding through time in the Orphan Wisdom School and with you, that there's moments, thresholds, visitations, as you've been speaking to, of deities, understanding death is one, and matrimony is the other, that give the chance for village to appear. Is maybe one way I've come to understand it. And so I think it's really important for people to understand, as we're sort of wading to the conversation, is that village just doesn't spontaneously emerge because people like to have potlucks or something, right? Which is what I tried in the suburbs for years. I tried to get, quote, community going, and nothing really happened because there wasn't really a need for it. Nobody really needed each other, right? It was just preference. And there's something in what you speak to around death as a moment of possibility for not like a personal sequestering away, right, of the time of dying, or the visitation of death upon a person and their family, but actually a moment for culture to appear, or village-mindedness to appear, and matrimony being the other. So I just wanted to volley that up first, just so people have a sense of like, what are we talking about here? Because you speak about, and maybe this is what I'd ask next, is what is the version that most people understand a wedding to be now? That, again, with all sorts of, I don't know what the word is. You can feel the people's, hackles rise as soon as we enter this part where people say, "What do you mean? My wedding was great." But it's important, I think, to draw a distinction between what you say is typically what is offered and what you see and what I see, and what this other thing might be.
Okay, a lot of ground there. See what I can do. Well, first of all, it doesn't surprise me, and it seems in keeping, frankly, that if you call into question how things have come to be as they are, that there will be casualties in doing so.
Hmm.
Okay? That people will identify themselves thoroughly with the current regime when it comes to the subject we're talking about now. And any question that's brought to bear upon the current regime seems to impugn people's kind of, let's call it, heart habits, the habits of their romance. Okay? And so people get rather twitchy around that kind of challenge. It's not surprising that they do. It's not necessary, but it's understandable. Okay. So there's the first caveat that in order to talk about these things at all, you do have to talk in a general sort of way. And we acknowledge that there are exceptions, considerable exceptions, most of which I know nothing about, never heard about them really to speak of. But there's also a thing called the way it is. So let's not frig around here. The way it is not an invention of me or the book or the time in the trade. The way it is, characterized by a kind of 15-minute walkthrough. That's not ungenerous to characterize it that way. A 15-minute walkthrough where the conclusions are utterly foregone. Okay? Utterly, nailed to the wall for all to see. Absolutely not in doubt. No question about the proceedings. Where you have invited people who are tantamount to a cheering section, a kind of rah-rah, quotient to go with your heartfelt declarations. Let's dolly back a little bit though, Ian, and see if I can do justice to a kind of seemingly innocuous event. That would be the invitation.
Hmm.
Now, if you've received any of these things, generally they're highfalutin, aren't they not? I mean, visually, they're kind of cursive script and quite circumlocucious in their way, aren't they? They
Mm-hmm.
challenge the Lindisfarne Gospels for ornamentation, and then you ask yourself, what do they say though? And then we'll go to what do they do. What they say, they begin with a kind of innocuous and kind enough, but probably grandiloquent kind of thing. The honor of your company is requested. So I don't know why I find that funny, but I mean, it's just overblown a bit, but you're obviously trying to put a nice tone to the proceedings, right? In advance. So the honor of your company. Oh, Lord.
It's an elevation of the proceedings, I think, in spirit, of course, but
Yeah,
as we see, yeah.
It may be the intention. I'm not sure it's the consequence, though. Okay?
Yeah.
And then you go to the heart of the beast of the invitation, and the beast says something like this. You're being asked to attend to a celebration of love between so-and-so and so-and-so. Now, who could conceivably be troubled by that?
For those listening without video, Stephen put his hand up.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, it's not fun to wonder about these things, It's heartbreaking to wonder about these things. It really and genuinely is. And then to put these considerations into words is doubly heartbreaking. I mean, just so we're clear, to go along with my hand raising, okay? So what's the dilemma with the celebration of love? Well, it's really a matter of what it isn't more than what it is, okay? What it is an imprimatur. What it is a stamp of approval. What it is a set piece that's designed to acknowledge a fact that already exists, called the relationship between two people, the feelings two people share, or whatever it is. You don't need a ritual to acknowledge the obvious. Okay? I would go further and say it's in the etymology of the word ritual to command our attention in a certain direction. The word ritual means something in the order of the tracking of the ways of the other world. Basically, that's what it means. The tracking of the otherworldly ways, right? That's the RIT part. In other words, when you're engaged in ritual, you're trying to find out something. You're in pursuit of something. You haven't already arrived. And this is nothing more than, easing back and relaxing because you've arrived. That's what a celebration is. And there's certainly places and times for such a thing. But you don't need a ritual. You don't need to spend all that money. You don't need to go to all that expense. You don't need to drive yourself mental and worse, and never mind in pursuit of so-called the perfect wedding or the storybook wedding or the fairy tale wedding, all of which are, when you think about it, less than ideal terms for the proposition that you're going into, that this seals the deal, so to speak. Okay. So matrimony and wedding are not the same thing. The word wedding clearly refers to a discrete, in time and place, specific kind of event that has a beginning, a middle, and end, that everybody knows that it's over when it's over. Okay? There's no lingering things. Secondly, it's not a matter of opinion as to whether you walk through that door. The nature of a wedding is to be clear to all and sundry that you have indeed walked through that door, whatever that means. Marriage is not the place in between matrimony and wedding. Marriage is the career arc that was set into motion sometime before this so-called magical day. The career arc, if you will, of your effort to love in real time. Okay, with all the slings and arrows, all the strange magic, all of the tender mercies, and all of the mercilessness and ruthlessness that applies. Matrimony, the word is not a mystery. The word is waiting there for us to become intelligent in its presence. The moni part is shares with a lot of words, ceremony being an obvious one, alimony being another, patrimony another. The moni part means a kind of repertoire, a kind of behavioral and psychic repertoire by which the prefix becomes recognizable. Okay, and the root word for matrimony is not woman, it's not wife, it's not female, it's not feminine, it's mother, very specifically mother. So it's the repertoire of mothering. Mothering what, though? The prerequisite for matrimony is not the appearance of a biological child, which is the product of the union. It's very important to put that out there and make it very crystal clear. That happens, and it can happen, and if it does, glory to us all. But that's not what matrimony is. Matrimony very clearly is a repertoire for culture mothering, of which the mothering and the fathering of children is an important and discrete, but relatively speaking, a minor part of that repertoire and that endeavor.
There's a quote from the book, which I think I'm called to read here, which is, matrimony is the place where culture leans on love for its portion, its tithe. Matrimony is the mothering of culture, and ritual is its vehicle, and patrimony is its precursor and waymaker. There's, again, I feel in maybe the architecture of the listener who maybe is unfamiliar with this understandings, right? Maybe trying to wrap their head around what's actually being said here and trying to make some sense of it. And I feel called to speak to the understanding that culture because based on what you shared, it requires an understanding of culture that isn't just, people doing things a certain way, who live in a place. That there's culture itself, as we've spoken, or you've spoken about in the school for many years and have really affected me, was a sense that real culture is an achievement.
Yeah.
Right? Real culture is an achievement, and that it's both like an inheritance on behalf of your a people, to an understanding of like how to be in the world and with each other, and to perhaps be generative to place itself. Like these seem to be aspects of that achievement. And so what we have often instead, at least in the dominant West, is what you might call anti-culture, right? Or I think you've said this understanding of society itself, or the dominant global, whatever that is, feeds on cultures. In fact, it actually devours cultures, and which is why we have the same chain stores and everywhere, and why we have the same kind of flatlining of specificity in place. And so this understanding that culture is an achievement and that it's in itself a living thing is perhaps how I might understand it. Then it becomes the question, what are those occasions where people have an opportunity to serve culture, or to be in the willingness to mother culture? So do I get that right in what I'm saying?
You could start.
Okay. Trying to do the heavy labor on behalf of the listener too, sort of piece these together. And so with this idea that matrimony is the possibility of culture to appear, to mother culture, then I wonder, a little vignette. I had a conversation with a friend a number of years ago who he'd only seen, again, these parties that, myself, I was a wedding DJ for a number of years. So I saw a lot of that. It was the same jokes. It was the same, pieces of advice. It was the same, cake push, smattering in the face, all that kind of stuff. And again, sweet to witness to. For a lot of people, they still consider that probably the most significant moment of their life, aside from perhaps a child being born. So it's clearly doing something for folks, but there's a certain nothing really happeningness, which is, I think, to what you're getting to. And so perhaps, like my friend who I spoke to, he was really, he's a man in his mid-30s, I think, at that point. And he was really in the case like, man, I'm never getting married. What's the point? Right? What's the point of marriage? It's just a dumb party. Right. And I did some quick stats online, before this interview, to just look at, again, what are the stats these days? And there's something like, I don't know, 30% less married people than there were in like the 70s. Within Canada, a lot of people are doing common law, habitations, right? Like the case for even the wedding seems to be less compelling for a lot of folk. And so I guess I'm with that question for you too, of maybe the listeners sitting there being like, yeah, what's the point of wedding? Maybe they're feeling exactly what you said, that most of them are sort of, expensive parties where, they're lovely for the moment, but maybe there's a deeper recognition that something was supposed to happen that didn't.
Right.
And maybe that's my next question to you is, what's that thing that has the chance of happening that so often doesn't? And why does that matter?
Right. Yeah, I'm glad you changed it from supposed to happen. It's not probably the phrase I would use, but the circumstances and the alchemical valence is there, whereby something could occur which doesn't, by virtue of our habits, occur. Okay, even our best intended habits, even our so-called most elevated habits, these kind of events we're alluding to now tend to elude us anyway. Okay. So, young people came to me, we're all younger than I, certainly, and were asking me to do this thing for them. I listened very carefully to the way that they were asking. And it was telling, and it was tragic to pay attention to the request. Okay. Because the request was full of despair, not overtly, but covertly, it was in the wings. The people were desperate to not replicate the empty vessel feeling that you just alluded to now, that they experience with virtually every time out with the wedding events of their friends. Benign enough. But my God, in a time like ours, is benign really something that you're after?
Hmm.
See, the question is begged, it's beggaring at the same time. So what's it supposed to be? Not the right question. What's the point? Not a question I would ever answer because it's argumentative. I'm not arguing. I'm lamenting. Okay. There's a considerable difference, right? Okay. So what's the lament over? The lament fundamentally is in a time of a kind of extraordinarily radicalized disassembly of the commons that we have seen underway in the West pointedly for several hundred years. Okay. It's reaching a kind of strange apex during the course of my lifetime and now yours, whereby the kind of supremacy, the kind of inviolable supremacy of the individual takes such a precedent that I was obliged in a recording event a couple of days ago for the new Grief and Mystery record to come up with a line that I was trying to find a way of doing justice to this dilemma. And this is the phrase that I came up with. They've said their lovers' vows. Safety first, then me, then you. I don't say that that's selfish, although it leaves room for all kinds of selfishness. I don't say that it's unbecoming. I don't say that that the style could use a little help. I say that it's fundamentally, it's an act of impoverishment. The notion that your obligation here in a time of such radicalized trouble as the time that we're in, that the first order of business in matters of the heart is safety. I mean, safety, frankly, of that kind, of the intact kind, it just has no place in matters of the heart. It has no place in the undertaking of fundamental surrender of the notion of potential, which is what you do engage in, whether you mean to or not. Okay.
Hmm.
The nature of the vows, and we could talk about vow if you'd like in a moment, but the nature of the vows, I'm not talking about the content now. I'm talking about the act of vowing is an act that understands the etymology of the word blessing. Okay. Right now, if we were to say blessing just and leave it stand and not talk about it at all, most people listening to us would understand the word blessing to be a synonym for a kind of deep running approval. That's what it is. It's a voting yes with whatever the proposition is. So if you seek someone's blessing, you're seeking for them to go along with you in some fundamental way, right? That's not what the word means at all. The word, for all of its semantic life, has meant to bloody, literally, to bloody, to draw blood. And if you elaborate this just ever so slightly, you realize in the act of blessing, you are calling to an end some element of the prevailing regime. Okay? Whether it be a regime of the heart or the nature, the habituation of the relationship or whatever it might be. If you're asking for someone's blessing, you're asking for them to oversee some finality when it comes to what you've brought to them. Okay? So my understanding of this in terms that we're talking about now is that when you engage the matrimonial gods, what you're doing is signing away something that is strangely a strange currency among us. This notion that as long as you maintain potential and principle, that you have all kinds of lateral room to move. And this includes life's choices, lifestyle options, and all the rest. And the idea somehow is that the more options you maintain, the more open ended the proposition is, the greater the possibility is for personal freedom and freedom of expression, etc., and all the rest. So there's a kind of mania in that, the mania to frustrate foreclosure. And I'm proposing here that matrimony is foreclosure upon the notion of potential. It's a trade-in, Ian. And what you're trading your potential for is one incarnated actual, one embodied, fleshly, temporal, severely limited, as it turns out, of course, and frail and wondrous proposition called the incursion upon infinity, which is another person. What? What does that mean? I'm suggesting to you that the realities of another person, they confound our notion that everything's possible, that anything's possible, that if you set your mind to it, all can be mysteriously otherwise. The fact of the other person and the fact of you in their life compromises that to the point of extinction and trades it in. It's not the right phrase. It bids it farewell in the name of an incarnation in the present moment of the best of what you're capable of starting now. And that's fundamentally the difference between vow and promise. And that's why they say that, in these moments, the guy at the front of the room, the woman at the front of the room is not leading you through a sequence of promises. And I'll tell you why this is not just a semantic difference, promise and vow, why it's a fundamental existential difference. If you think about how promises have worked in your life so far, think of the ones you made, think of the ones you kind of half made and you failed to make altogether. Think of the ones you're on the receiving end of as well. Consider their valence, consider their operative range, consider their frequency, right? Their intensity. And one of the things you will find with enough consideration is they all tended to have one thing in common. They were trading on the future, much in the way that hope does. Okay? So promises, the word has two parts to it. Mitere, which means to throw or cast. Okay? And the pro part means something like in front of. So to promise literally means to throw ahead of yourself. So you can see the notion of the future is inherent in the proposition of making promises. So I would ask you then to consider the following unlikely possibility. You're at the front of the room. You're in one of the generic wedding moments that we've alluded to earlier. The celebrant leads you through the list of things that they propose to hold you to. And you respond something like this. Listen, I'm glad you brought this up. I was thinking about this stuff a lot lately, especially given what we're doing here this evening. And here's what I've thought of I hope this will do. Do you know, I really do mean well here. And I've come here with an open heart and I'm going to give it, everything I've got. I believe that I will. But we also know that life is what life is and people are intemperate at times and inconsistent at times. And so my efforts to fulfill everything I'm claiming that I'll do now are just frail, aren't they? And so can we settle for this for now? I'll do my best. and hopefully you'll do the same. And all the deals are off. And so we mean to be in, but we'll have to see, won't we? Realistically speaking, because you're asking me to do things I've never done, and I've certainly never done with this person. So in all fairness, give us a few years, and we'll see how it goes. Can you imagine the response in the room? I mean, is it realistic? Yes, it's realistic, But is it in the spirit of matrimony? Excuse the language, but fuck no, it is not. And you can feel the transgressive thing. And it's all because it's saying, let's see. It's a promises are a kind of pinky swear with the universe, aren't they? They're the great let's see, the great out clause. How is this different from a vow? I use the word vow. It has an antique sound, doesn't it? And it also has a sound of remarkable gravitas about it. And it's one of the reasons we just do not use the word in idle conversation. You do not declare that this is what you're doing unless you are. And the place where the word most frequently shows up to the exclusion of really all the other possibilities is the very moment we're discussing now, where the celebrant at the front of the room leads you through the propositions, right? One by one. And interestingly enough, the shard, the remnant of the old order matrimony is there in the phrase, because they don't say, will you, shall you, do you mean to, will you? None of those verb tenses are there. They say, do you? You see? In other words, a vow is a kind of crucifixion of sorts. A vow is a nailing into the wood of the world what your heart means to do and to be. And it says by virtue of saying it, you are making it so. In other words, you're counting on the alchemical power of expression to bring something into being which does not exist until you have said it. It's very, very powerful business, making a vow, and not to be done lightly. And so I think it's important to make the distinction and to see between the two possibilities. You can feel that kind of lost opportunity thing if the spirit of promise or compromise is entered into while pretending that you're entering into the spirit of matrimony.
Well, I'm imagining that friend of mine hearing this as well and saying, okay, so yeah, what's the alchemy there? Because there's again, I'm speaking to men listening to who maybe wondered about marriage, maybe tried it, failed at it, or the marriage ended. And there's this kind of like, should I rise again? And there's something in the recognition of like what's being traded. And sometimes, I see it on Instagram, men's coaches and things saying that there's the freedom of the younger man to kind of do what they want, when they want, whenever they want. It's a powerful thing, right? To have that kind of freedom. And yet there's this other thing, which is, as you say, kind of binding your heart to this one other human in this moment. And that there's a certain something that opens up because of that. As you say, closing, all the other maybes, or foreclosing on the maybes, allows for something to emerge. And personally, there's the benefit of that is a kind of, I'm imagining this truth of, it's like that which you pay attention to, or that which you are devoted to, tends to revivify, tends to be enlivened by that. So there's something about, not having one foot on the exit, maybe in common law, right? Where maybe it feels a little easier to slip out the side door. Although we also know divorces, right, are sort of much easier in a sense, right, to get these days. But there's something about that, that alchemical rooting to this possibility or this other person that allows for something, or maybe conjures something. And so this is where I wonder for you. So beyond that, in a sense of a culture-making moment or a culture conjuring, like what is that? Because I have my ideas about it now, seeing what happened with the weddings that, you orchestrated. And I'd be curious to hear a person saying, okay, so I do that. I'm there, I'm vowing. Okay, now, but then what? I'd love to hear.
Well, first of all, if you're doing what I'm talking about, you're not saying then what? Okay, that's an outsider's take. That's the first.
Yeah, the guy on the sidelines who's hearing this, right? Yeah, saying, okay, well then what?
It's the sideline point of view, isn't it?
Yeah.
You can tell it's not a participant's point of view. Yeah. Well, this is an enormous consideration I'm going to try to squeeze into one non-argumentative declaration. Goes
Great.
something like this. Presumably, and when things go even reasonably well, factually, one of the things that derives from intentional and deliberate and overt commitment to and declaration of the kind of enthroning of the intensity of the feelings between two people. One of the consequences of that, at least in the short term, even in the medium term, all cynicism aside, is a sense of well-being. It sounds benign, but man, you can't get through a day without it.
Mm.
A sense of well-being is not a promissory note. It may shade in the direction of the future, but it's not really about the future. Your sense of well-being is present and accounted for and operative in the present. You know you have it when you have it. The point I'm making here is your sense of well-being of that kind can easily become what they call in psychiatric terms folie à deux, the madness of two. Okay, it can become a kind of mutual fascination society, right?
Hmm.
Am I saying there's anything inherently wrong? Forget right and wrong. Am I saying that it's a grotesquerie of a sort? I am. I'm suggesting that the sense of well-being's the real generative, nurturing power that's there is meant to spill over the drinking cup of your little life. Okay? In other words, to say it very plainly, you feeling good about yourself. I mean, in a deep way now. You feeling good about the possibilities. You feeling good about being alive. All of these things should have and do, in fact, have demonstrable consequence for the wider circle of people that you know and beyond to people that you don't know, right? And the wider culture literally draws down from your sense of well-being its capacity to nurture and to culture and to believe and to operate accordingly. Okay? So it turns out it's not really a Freudian compromise with civilization and its discontents. I don't think that's what culture is at all. I think culture is a circumstance in which people have, over long periods of time, have crafted remarkable skillfulnesses when it comes to matters of the heart and have cashed out matters of the heart to be fundamentally community binding propositions. That's what the event explicitly was for so many centuries for. It was literally to choreograph a kind of dance of mutual recognition between two kin groups, let's call them, who were maybe prior to that not really known to each other very well. And the purpose of that is to widen the circle of a sense of inclusivity and belonging. And, you've heard me make a lot of hay out of the word belonging, but I use it now to say that belonging etymologically means the intensification of longing, the deepening, the enablement of longing, right? Such that you can be in the presence of that which you long for and long evermore for it. And one of our greatest practitioners verbally or lyrically of that skill was Leonard Cohen, which is why so many people are mad for the guy and don't really know why. Because he at some level, he seems rather foreclosed upon as a kind of human and his sense of what's the likelihoods. Himself never married, right? He said it was too hot a house, it exacted a kind of moral courage that he didn't feel he possessed. And he never went there. So anyway, there's no way of summarizing what I'm talking about here except to say that clearly, historically and ancestrally, there was an understanding that there was an awful lot at stake in the matrimonial event. And I think the rudiments, the fundament of even still today, what we practice matrimonially is to be located in what I came to call in the book, the sacraments of trade. And if you think of the distinction between trade and commerce, the spirit of commerce basically being how much can you get for how little you have to pay. Okay. And the spirit of trade being by virtue of the exchange of these pieces of patrimony between us, we have found a way to elevate our mutual ancestries. And our ancestors are looking upon us in this dignified act and finding their continuance amongst the land of the living in our capacity to do so. That's the root condition of the matrimonial event.
It strikes me the parallel that you've spoken to of death and the deity of dying, and how the presence or the visitation of death as a possibility of culture-making moment where the dying person is not the center of what's happening in a sense. And it can be strange, right, for somebody hearing this too for the first time. Like, what do you mean the dying person? Aren't they the center? I've heard you say this, and my best understanding of that, it's life is at the center, and how we orchestrate around how ways we are with each other, the way that culture has a moment to show up. And it strikes me that there's stories I've heard from friends who have either come from another culture where there has, cultural rights more available to them, where someone dies in the community and all of a sudden, boom, there's this response from the culture itself. One friend, I think he was speaking of in South America, where the peoples, they knew they would come sit at the house of the person who died. They wouldn't leave for 4 days. They would take care of it all. There was songs that were sung and all this processional stuff that it wasn't left to the people closest to the death or the dying person and, their families to just figure it out. And only do you really realize when I experience something or hear something like that, the poverties, of course, of the way it is for so many in the dominant West, right, where it's really up to the close kin. So in the same way, I understand, as I did, where when my first and only marriage so far was drawing from, as best we could, some traditions that felt meaningful to us, but that my partner and I at the time, we kind of crafted it ourselves, and that felt like a win, a win from the jaws of maybe some other tradition that didn't feel ours. And the divorce was about a decade later, and very unspectacular in the sense, it would struck me deeply, though, even the beginning of that marriage was in some version of a ceremony or a wedding, as best we could. And the dissolution of it was in a, office in Burnaby, with a stroke of a pen. And there was just something clear to me, even as I see now. It's like, because did anything happen at the quote beginning of this wedding, this matrimony? Non-matrimony, because it didn't seem the case at the end of it, with nobody around, and us as the couple being relatively bereft of any kind of support that we didn't even know how to ask for, right? And so, again, I see the consequence of this idea that coming for a celebration, an affirmation of love for many, where the participants are witnesses, pretty much, and could come for the party and the top
Audience.
40 music, or the audience. Sorry,
Or an audience.
the audience. And then people go home, and then the couple often, as I did, and he'll stories for couples, they're like, whoa, did anything happen? Everybody's gone, their bank account's depleted, and they're left alone again. Like, I guess that's the other piece, right? That there's a sense of, if there's no binding to each other in a true, meaningful way, then there is a wonder what's happened or what was served in how we went about things.
In other words, everything turns into Monday morning.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I understand the instinct to self-generate these matters. Absolutely. I can understand it as it's clearly a poverty of options when people look down the likelihoods and say, well, we can either do something, quote, we don't believe in, that has nothing to do with our lived lives, quote, tradition, or we can just go for broke and see what we can come up with and just earmark, our favorite poems in a book and have our friends read them and get somebody else's voice, not the celebrant's voice, and we're going to eliminate obey, of course, because no friggin' obeying going on around here, and free ourselves from all of that. And you kind of wonder, by the time you've exercised all the stuff you find deeply disagreeable and discredited about, quote, tradition, it's kind of, it's important that you consider what have you got that's left, you see. I would go so far as to say the tradition, no, not tradition, formality. That's a better word for what I mean here. That formality is there explicitly to rescue you from the excesses of your autobiography. That's what it's for, okay? Formality, when modern people say, I don't see myself in it, formality's response is, well, of course you don't. You're not here. You're not standing here. You're not subject to the slings and arrows of wildness that constitute matrimony. So, of course, you would find it beyond your experience or irrelevant to your experience. So, no argument, and none from me either. So, if the conclusion that people draw down from this is, I have no interest in it, there's no argument there. Okay, proceed without it. And but listen to what Ian said about what things were like in the office in Burnaby with the stroke of a pen, and consider that if anything had happened in the years before, in the event of the marriage, do you think there'd be any corollary happening there at the end? If there were real witnesses for its initiation, do you not think that there should reasonably be witnesses there at its cessation? Or are we content to believe that the only real celebratory or ritual events are only for beginnings and there are no ending rituals?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm.
So you see, the poverties are extreme in the matter we're discussing now. And the notion that people are left to their own devices and they can just self-generate from good intention a kind of replacement, non-traditional, anything goes, we got it figured out kind of deal is, it's the latest incarnation of the poverty.
I am called to speak to, at least how I understand the processional sequence of things that you were so generous to share with me upon the threshold of my son being born with my partner. And the story sketched in brief is, we came together very much in a tornado of passion and romance and all of the, beautiful ways in which someone can seem a good idea. And certainly she was to me and I was to her. And we became pregnant very quickly, or she did, and I participated in that. And there was a sort of catch-up required, right, in order to kind of proceed well towards the birth of our son. And throughout that process, and particularly in a baby blessing that you were so generous to come with your wife, Nathalie, and kind of orchestrate a moment of calling in, of acknowledgement, and again, another village-minded possibility for the oncomingness of our son. There was a kind of startling recognition around why there's a sequence to these things, and that it's not just tradition in the sense of stuffy old tradition, right? And it really struck me, actually. And this is now going to the understanding of of culture and this sort of processional nature of culture and how it possibly could show up when you consider the aperture wider than just that ceremony, right? Or just the matrimony event.
Yeah.
And then it starts to click, hopefully, as well. I mean, it clicked for me and maybe for the listener as well, as they start to see that like all of these threshold moments of, a child growing up, but being around other adults that are in their lives in meaningful ways. And, our uncles and aunties and recognition of them and their growth. But then also in terms of deaths that happen within, again, the community and how folks show up for each other in meaningful ways, to the oncomingness of love between two people, right? And sort of recognized and maybe slowed down by, mediated by the community or the village because of that rush of hormones and lust and all the rest, to say, okay, well, let's slow down a bit. Let's get in the way a bit. Into the matrimony event itself, hopefully endorsed by the rest of your kin and your people who have now seen that love in how it has professed toward each other, into then, if it's granted, pregnancy and birth of a child into the midst. And you had some phrase, I think, at the time around the sense of that all of that weaving, all of that village conjuring is like a basket for a child to come into, where, again, it's not just a entrustment to the couple in question, but that, there's a number of others who are embedded meaningfully along the way. And so, again, to me, as soon as I start to see it in that sense of, I almost call it a cultural tapestry, perhaps, it all starts to make sense. It's not just about that matrimonial moment, but that itself, it's continuing to feed something together along the way of how tough it is to be a human being, and certainly now in these times. And so I just wanted to name that and maybe hear it. Am I getting it, basically? Understanding of this that is hitting the mark.
I went to the trouble of doing the weddings, right? At considerable personal peril and expense, I have to say.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I saw it. Yeah.
Yeah, you saw it. A lot of people didn't know what they were looking at when they saw it. But I was the target of some extraordinary enmity in a circumstance that's allegedly supposed to be happy and happy making as well. See? So why did I do all that? Because I had a sense that you've kindly described and ascribed to me of the continuity, maybe continuity is not the right word, of the kind of successive and episodic realm of consequence that fans out from our undertakings, and I just felt and knew to be so that many a thing was at stake, in an event that's allegedly about how two people feel about each other. As you said earlier, that's not the center. That's the occasion. That's the occasion for the culture to find its way, stretch its wings, flex its muscles, know itself again, reiterate itself again, reconsider itself again. All of these things are in the offing, you see. And it employs the intensity of feeling between two people as the latest and greatest chance for them to get it right. That's what it is. For whose sake? Yes, is the answer. For whose sake? Yes. For everyone's sake, though not everyone at once. But that's the kind of ripple effect that I was alluding to earlier, right? That this is the nature of the word awake. Etymologically, the condition of being awake, and I know you've heard this from me before, is the condition of being drawn into an understanding of the web of consequence that emanates from everything you've done and haven't done and said and haven't said and failed to say and failed to understand and half understood and so on. And so just the normal human frailties, right, have extraordinary consequence. And this is not a recipe to seize up in fear and trepidation. This is a recipe of understanding that if many a thing is at stake, the other half of it is that many a thing can be done. So even though I came up against extraordinary resistance and cruelty and disparagement and so forth and all of that, I set the whole story to, I did this. Like, it wasn't bad enough. I went through it and lived it and all the rest and survived to tell this tale. But then I wrote the tale down, and tried to make sense of it and tried to make it available to people. Why? Because I know in my heart that it's possible. Okay, that it's possible that we don't have to sign off on the kind of astringent, ruthless poverties that we're recently heir to. That there's many ways to act in the name of social justice, right? Being on the ramparts is one way, for sure it is, but it's certainly not the only way. And there are times when it's not the best way either. And seems to me one of the better ways is that you engage the remarkable intensity of feeling that people have for each other. That's romantic and existential and rhapsodic and intoxicating, and it rubs on the nerve endings, and we could just go on. And does what with it? Employs it. Not tamps it down. It employs it. It engages it as a life force. You see, and it says simply, something that volatile in fairness shouldn't be entrusted to two people who are in the center of the crucible of it all. Right? It should be dispersed to some extent. That's what the witnesses are for. To carry, that's what the word witness means, right? Don't we use the term a bit archaic, to bear witness? What does the term mean? It means to carry it around. Doesn't mean to endure it necessarily. It means to bear it forward, to see to it that it doesn't go into eclipse come Monday morning or next year or on the first anniversary or the 5th. That you have witnesses who were there, who remember it better than you do, who can be your living memory even now. And yes, sometimes hold you to what you said you meant to be and to do at the time. And there's nothing wrong with eating your words on occasion. But to be reminded that there was a part of you that was structurally courageous at the time. To be invited back to remarry that courageous part of you that had some kind of love-induced understanding of what was possible and what was at stake. And yes, the carborundum of daily life can diminish that, can steal it from you, or worse. That's all true. This is why we don't all get married on the same day, like those Mooney weddings, that, people get married and most people don't on a given Saturday or a given Friday or whatever it is. And, it's the same understanding that, sane cultures are not full of sane people. Sane cultures are places where not everybody's crazy at the same time. And the people whose turn it is to be sane understand that the people who are not are fundamentally doing them a favor, reminding them that their time may come and that the efficacy of sanity is to be understood in terms of how sanity incorporates, gathers in, and contends with craziness. It's the same in matters of the heart, not just, quote, mental health, but matters of the heart are equally recognizable, it seems to me, in that symmetry.
This understanding of matrimony as, or could be, I think you've spoken in the book, an act of radical citizenship. An act of radical citizenship as a fundamental different orientation than a celebration of love, which, as you've spoken at length, is a wonderful thing to have a party. But just let's not confuse it for this other thing, which is an opportunity for culture to be fed. Maybe I'd say, and both on this podcast, I speak about things like rites of passage, in particular for young men, and I'll get fathers asking me questions too, like, when do I start? This kind of thing. How does it happen? And is it when the kid's 13 or something, right? Which is for a lot of the men, right? Oh, I got to think about this now. And I'm recalling this now as we're speaking too of properly that when times come for other kinds of thresholds or alchemical moments to come, it's like this is part of what you're drawing from, or could draw from in terms of the deeper relationships where, one time it was you on the altar, getting married, but then later it's support of the young son of your friend, or that all of these moments are reinforced in each other's lives. That it's not really to ensure that it's not something airdropped, right? When a kid is 12, it's like these are all these other moments to show up, to conjure, to participate. And so again, all of this starts to make sense to me as I begin to imagine it in this tapestry or this prismatic way. And so this line between the deity of death, the deity of matrimony, elderhood, as you've spoken obviously so eloquently as well, Steve, in your other book. I just deeply appreciate your ability to kind of walk through these different shards of an intact understanding and say, hey, can we look at this? Can we wonder in a disciplined way about this and how it might be otherwise?
Right. Well, I'm glad you do, Ian. And without sounding in any way formulaic, you're who I did it for. I could have had a full life without submitting myself to all of that. And did have, frankly. So, was I a servant in that sense? Yes, absolutely I was. Was it selfless? Not on your life was it selfless. I sought a sense of achievement and satisfaction and all the rest. Of course I did. I tried to get it right, and I tried to employ literally everything I'd seen, not just in doing the Orphan Wisdom School or doing the Nights of Grief and Mystery over the years, but having been spared to have been finally alive at that age in the times that we were doing this, to employ all of that, to spend it all on the off chance that there was something in there and there was someone in there that, through the sequence that you so well described a few minutes ago, would have a memory of something real, not good, not favorable, real, right? I was Matrimony's spirit lawyer. I wasn't in the corner of the people getting married. They had people. I saw to it that they did. But I wasn't that person. My job was to be a ministering angel in the retinue of matrimony. Yes, that's what it was. And I was enormously honored to be asked, and the memories of it are almost uniformly remarkable and grand and, deeply affirming, and it still comes to me from time to time when people who are there just get that look in their eye that's partly wistful and partly nostalgic and partly grief soaked. And, it's all there. And you can see that those are the eyes of a veteran who has seen a kind of war that we conducted against meaninglessness, against despair, against the sense of that everything's fouled, that nothing works, that nothing matters, etc. And to take that on, frontally, not just by inference, not pretend it's not so. That's what made it real to me. And it still is. And, it's wonderful to have witnesses, of which you are one.
Well, to the listener, please check out Stephen's book, Matrimony, Ritual, Culture, and the Heart's Work. It's a magnificent offering and entrustment to us, Stephen. So once again, thank you for writing.
Thank you, Ian. Thanks for your time, man.
Thank you for listening to this episode with Stephen Jenkinson. To explore more of his work, visit orphanwisdom.com, where you'll find access to his books, essays, albums, and much more. And if you enjoyed this episode, please feel free to share it on your social media, email to your friends. It really helps me to spread the word and connect with the right folks who would find value in these conversations. Thank you.